98 years ago, the Sunday New York Times had the following blockbuster headline on its September 15th, 1918 front page. Documents prove Lenin and Trotsky hired by Germans. I blew up the second page of this. I know that you can see it on the video or not. You know, this is the great New York Times. The Times article went on to say that the present heads of the Bolshevist government, Lenin and Trotsky and their associates, are German agents, that the Bolshevist revolt was arranged by the German Great General Staff and financed by German Imperial Bank and other German financial institutions. There you have it, the Russian Revolution, the millions of poor people who fought for peace, land, and bread, who broke open the doors to oppress people all over the earth, from China to Cuba to Vietnam, Laos, and Korea, and yes, to workers and oppressed people in the United States, that got support from black liberation fighters like Claude McKay, Langston Hughes, W.B. Du Bois, and Paul Robeson, was, according to the New York Times, just a conspiracy organized by the German Kaiser. The New York Times vouched that this story was true. After all, it was based on evidence provided by the United States government, specifically by Edgar Sisson of the Committee on Public Information. And this evidence was palpable. 68 documents that were vouched for by a former president of the American Historical Association, J. Franklin Jameson, and a professor of Russian at the University of Chicago, Samuel Harper. But a century ago, the Underwood manual typewriter was high technology. And these documents that were supposedly typed in different places were really almost all typed in the same typewriter. The monumental fraud of the Sisson documents almost immediately imploded. In the 1950s, the retired U.S. diplomat George Kennan, himself an architect of the Cold War, pronounced the Sisson documents to be forgeries. But almost as soon as they were published in the Times, the Sisson documents were exposed as lies. These documents became a scandal that helped mobilize support for the Russian Revolution. Dock workers in Seattle smashed crates of guns that they're supposed to be shipped to the Tsarist Admiral Kolchak in Siberia, a beast who threw suspected Bolsheviks into the boilers of steam locomotives. The Sisson documents was fake news in 1918, but with the assistance of the Democratic administration of Woodrow Wilson, who had written approvingly of the Ku Klux Klan, this big lie helped establish the New York Times as the paper of record in the United States. This was the fake news on the front page of yesterday's New York Times. This is an 8,000-word article with no proof whatsoever. Unlike the phony Sisson documents, there's no hard evidence behind the CIA's allegations that Russia hacked the U.S. elections. Even the Washington Post and New York Times that are peddling this fake news admit that it's only circumstantial evidence that points the finger at Russia. But it doesn't even rise to that. It's simply the CIA saying, believe us. Now, if one just looked at the headlines and listened to the sound bites, one might think that Russians hacked voting machines. Even the CIA doesn't claim that. It wasn't Russia that suppressed the vote of black, Latin, and Native people in North Carolina and elsewhere. It wasn't President Putin who enacted voter ID laws that are really another poll tax, which are supposed to be prohibited by the 24th Amendment. That's right. And it wasn't Russians who set up the Electoral College, which is sending super bigot Donald Trump to the White House while he got nearly 3 million less votes than Hillary Clinton. It was slave masters like James Madison who concocted the Electoral College to protect slavery. It was the capitalist media right here in the United States that gave Trump a free ride that included at least an estimated $2 billion of free publicity. It was NBC giving Trump his own TV show that made this racist clown a nationally known figure. The CIA stories that Russian government operatives hacked the files of the Democratic National Committee and its congressional campaign affiliate, as well as Hillary Clinton's campaign manager, John Podesta, and provided embarrassing information to WikiLeaks. That's it. Embarrassing information that got out. But James Assange, editor of WikiLeaks denied that Russia was the source. And yesterday it was revealed in the London Daily Mail that Craig Murray, a former British ambassador to Uzbekistan, who's now working with WikiLeaks, says the material came from a disgusted Democratic Party whistleblower. If a Brinks truck is expropriated, it's usually an inside job. The biggest WikiLeaks disclosures, the revelations that the National Security Agency is spying on everybody's phone conversations, and that even German Chancellor Angela Merkel's phone conversations were spied upon, were exposed by whistleblowers on the inside, including Edward Snowden and the courageous Chelsea Manning. Free Chelsea Manning! All it takes is somebody with a thumb drive and access. Not only are these allegations about Russian hacking fake news, they're also old news. The Washington Post reported back on July 27th that there's no evidence connecting anything to Russian intelligence, according to one official. So what's behind the CIA claims? It's got to have a lot to do with the liberation of Aleppo by Syria's elected government, along with help from Hezbollah, Iran, and Russia. This is a monumental defeat for the CIA and U.S. imperialism that have given billions to the forces fighting and trying to overthrow the Syrian government. These rebels fighting the Syrian people and its allies are rebels, all right. They're rebels like Jefferson Davis and Stonewall Jackson were rebels. And that's why they're opposed by socialist Cuba and the Palestinian people. The other reason that this fake news is being pushed is to divert the struggle against billionaire Klansman Donald Trump. There may be millions of people coming to Washington, D.C. on J20. The capitalist class and its Democratic National Committee want to deflect the hatred people have for a capitalist system whose racist cops strangled Eric Gardner to death and shot to death 12-year-old Tamir Rice. Our enemies are in the Pentagon and the corporate boardrooms, not in Moscow. Why in the hell should we believe the CIA, NSA, or any other government spy agency? Military intelligence spied on Dr. King's grandfather for giving a sermon against lynching. And Dr. King's family believed that he was murdered as part of a plot by the U.S. government as part of the FBI's COINTELPRO program. The world's biggest, bloodiest, and wealthiest terrorist organization is the CIA. The CIA organized coups d'etats from Iran in 1953, where the CIA put the Shah back on his throne and thousands were tortured by the CIA-trained Savak secret police, to Guatemala in 1954, where democratically elected President Jacobo Arbenz was overthrown for giving peasants land that wasn't being used by United Fruit, to Indonesia in 1965, where 1 million people were slaughtered, to Chile, where President Allende was overthrown on September 11th, 1973. The CIA carried out Operation Phoenix in Vietnam that murdered and tortured at least 30,000 people. It was the CIA that organized dozens of plots to attempt to kill our beloved Comandante, Fidel Castro. It was the CIA that helped murder Patrice Lumumba and turned Nelson Mandela over to the apartheid secret police, who kept him in jail for nearly 28 years. And it was the CIA that carried out regime change in Dallas, Texas on November 22nd, 1963. Yep. The National Security Agency claimed Vietnamese PT boats attacked the U.S. Navy's 7th Fleet in the Gulf of Tonkin in 1964. This was the big lie that LBJ used to escalate the war against Vietnam and Laos, which also spread to Cambodia. Millions of people, including 58,000 GIs, died for this fake news. Hundreds of thousands continue to suffer from Agent Orange, including our comrade Renee. So are we supposed to believe the CIA and NSA when they squawk about Russia? And what about the capitalist media? You don't have to go back 98 years ago to find the New York Times spreading fake news. Back on September 8th, 2002, the Times ran a front-page story by Michael Gordon and Judith Miller about Iraq having weapons of mass destruction. This was a notorious lie that aluminum tubes were somehow part of a nuclear weapons program. The Times actually had to apologize for these lies in 2004. Judith Miller was forced to leave the Times. She now pops up on Fox News. But her fellow liar, Michael Gordon, is still the chief military correspondent for the Times. The Times and the Washington Post acted as cheerleaders for George Bush and Dick Cheney, and half the Democrats in the U.S. Senate, including Hillary Clinton and John Kerry, voted in support of Bush's war resolution. It's not just lies that are suppressed by the capitalist media. They also suppress the truth. Gary Webb, the courageous reporter who told the truth about how the Reagan administration was pumping crack until South Los Angeles was finally driven to suicide by the likes of Howard Kurtz, a liar in the Washington Post staff who's now lying for Fox News. Robert Perry, then an AP reporter, also broke open the Contragate story and stood by Gary Webb. His consortium site is a good news site. Both the Times and the Washington Post suppressed news about the El Mozote massacre in El Salvador. New York Times reporter Raymond Bonner and Washington Post reporter Alma Guillermo Prieto told the truth about this horrible tragedy. But the Reagan administration was fearful of the political impact of another story like the My Lai massacre did for the Vietnam War struggle against the Vietnam War. Times managing editor Abe Rosenthal took Bonner away from the reporter's desk. The truth about the El Mozote massacre wasn't revealed until years later when a forensic investigators really are from Argentina, showed that most of the victims, the murdered victims, were infants. Times editor Abe Rosenthal was also a homophobic bigot that blamed the word gays when he was at the helm. And let's not forget the big lie that Chicago Tribune told about the assassination of Fred Hampton and Mark Clark on December 4th, 1969. I attended the funeral of both these leaders of the Black Panther Party. The Tribune, sort of hard to see, but they have exclusive hand-to-hand police tell Panther story. Inside they have a picture of supposedly some bullet holes from shotgun blasts that the police had to defend themselves. Well, it turns out upon investigation these shotgun blasts were really nails. Not only is there not any evidence to accuse Russia of tampering with the U.S. elections, but the United States almost openly tampers with elections all over the world. U.S. election consultants boasted about how they helped re-elect Boris Yeltsin in the 1996 Russian election. The U.S. Congress set up the National Endowment for Democracy, which has a budget over $130 million and intervenes in elections everywhere. So does its affiliates, the National Democratic Institute and National Republican Institute. They did a lot of the dirty work that led up the overthrow of the elected president of Haiti, President Aristide. The CIA has spent millions on subverting elections. Exxon admitted that it spent $94 million in Italy alone. Now, right now, this is an extremely serious crisis within the ruling class. It may be the biggest one since Watergate. You have the phenomenon where the CIA is claiming the Russians didn't, the FBI is poo-pooing it. Usually these two Gestapo agencies, that's what they are on their same page. The forces behind Trump, a lot of it reminds you of the forces behind Goldwater in 1964. It's frackers like Ham, the smaller banks. The big banks in Goldman Sachs, well, they were behind Hillary Clinton. But almost all the big bourgeoisie, you could see it with these from Silicon Valley. They're all going to Trump Tower and groveling before Trump. And the thing about Tillerson is he's another Standard Oil Secretary of State. What's new about that? And whether or not some of the Rockefellers divested their stock and maybe they're concerned about global warming, they might have to, raise their docks to, house their yachts and all that. That's where their wealth comes from, the original billionaire family. And ExxonMobil doesn't like the sanctions against Russia have cost them $1 billion. So this is an intense struggle within the bourgeoisie. We want to monitor it. But also we have to get out and tell people, including people, good people in the oppressed communities even, because this is being pushed right down from the Democratic National Committee, which is the bourgeoisie, that somehow Russia pushed the election on Trump, and that this is a diversion from the struggle. Once again, our struggle is against Wall Street. Our struggle is against racist cops. Our struggle is not against Russia. Thank you very much.